So I wanted to do a short vlog because it was recently announced not too long ago that Desi had been released from eLevate, and in his place was going to be Professor Chaos, at least for now. Apparently Professor Chaos was being used as a stand-in prior to Desi being released because Rush or something like that was on vacation. And I know Professor Chaos has been looking for a team ever since he got dropped from Nylum. And I had heard rumors that he was a potential target for some other teams out there. But apparently, because of his contract with Nylum, it was too expensive to buy out. So a lot of different teams were really hesitant on picking him up because his contract was so expensive to buy out. And so I don't know if he's just standing in for eLevate temporarily, and then once his contract with Nylum expires and he will like officially sign on as a member of that team. Obviously, no announcement has been actually made that Professor Chaos is a full-time team member. It just strictly states that he's a stand-in and that Desi has been let go. Now, obviously, you have to think about the legal kind of repercussions of something like this, and you have to also kind of read in between the lines. This exact same thing happened when Hiko was kind of joining up that super team, with Daisy Case, Skadoodle, and Swag, the former iBuy Power, who were rumored to were going to join EG up until the whole match fixing scandal. And the language was exactly the same in that situation. Hiko was always labeled as a stand-in. And, it was always that he was still in a contract with Cloud9, but was a stand-in for this new team, and he was just playing with friends, kind of helping out. It's the same kind of legal language, basically. And it's pretty much the same situation here, I think, for Professor Chaos. He's in a situation where I think he's still under contract, and so he is just being labeled as a stand-in, but he could probably develop into a full-time member. I think other orgs just wanted to kind of avoid that whole process, and that's why he didn't get picked up earlier than he has been picked up now. So let's approach this from both sides, right? Let's first approach it from the thoughts about Desi being released, and then I'll focus on Professor Chaos being brought into the team, and this will be a pretty short and sweet video, mostly because I've already spoken a lot about Desi in previous videos. So if you go back and look, I think I did a State of NA CSGO vlog where I talked about like who are all the other teams in NA, because I had done like a specific video on Cloud9 and Liquid and CLG, but then I did like another video like who else is out there type video. This was like I guess a couple of months ago or something, and I talked about Desi in pretty great length there. I'll actually link that timestamp in the description below if you want to hear just kind of more of my in-depth thoughts about Desi as a player over time. But just to kind of quickly rehash it, Desi is a very good individual player, very, very aggressive rifler, very much in-your-face player. However, this can be his, strength. It can also be one of his greatest weaknesses. You can kind of see sometimes when he was playing with eLevate where he seemed to kind of go off on his own and try to make these hero plays. Like I remember, watching Dust 2 games where he would just kind of walk out double doors mid by himself, no real nade cover, no real support from a teammate. Just look for that engagement on the mid to A rotator playing in CT spawn without, like I said, any type of nade support or any type of follow-up ability from a teammate. Maybe he would just run out naked with no nades, as I said, no even pop flashes, and he would just try to take that engagement just because he had a lot of confidence in his aim and his ability to win those 1v1 aim battles. And sometimes he would win those 1v1 aim battles, and all of a sudden this team has an instant 5v4, and they even have a little bit of mid control, and things are looking great. But if he loses that aim battle, then all of a sudden it's a 4v5 in the other team's favor now, and you have like no opening, and you're just down a man trying to do your execute. And so I don't know if this was because the in-game leader XP3 like allowed Desi to do these types of things, or if he just had like a looser style of leadership, so there was a lot of ability for, I guess, like, I'm trying to think of how to put this here. I don't know if it was a situation where it was just like there was a lot of freedom given, or if Desi just didn't listen, or what it was, but I think it's just a point where this could be, like I said, a strength for Desi or a weakness for Desi. And against international teams, obviously, this isn't going to work when you're up against people who are just as skilled as you. Against like tier 2 NA teams or what have you, it would probably definitely work. Even against some of the other tier 1 NA teams, you might win those gun battles more often than not. But yeah, it's one of those things where his over aggression sometimes overextension could be a huge handicap for his team. I'll just leave it at that. I've also heard things about his attitude from countless people. I have personally spoken with Desi at a couple of different LAN events. I spoke to him at ClutchCon, and then I spoke to him at the last CEVO LAN. So I guess I've spoken to him like twice in person this year. At length, I would have like good discussions with him at both events. One of the guys I talked to the most out of all the players, actually. So I feel like I do have some pretty good insight here. And just from talking with Desi, I can just tell how confident he is that he's one of the best players in North America. He really does feel that he deserves to be on a top team, a team that's competing internationally. He feels like he's one of the better players in NA, if not one of the best. That is his thoughts about himself. And I had to kind of explain to him, I'm like, well, you may have the skill set that can make you that, but you don't necessarily have the accolades to back that up. You don't necessarily have any real accomplishments under your belt yet. Meaning, he hadn't really won any LANs. I don't think he's won a LAN at all within the NA scene. Obviously, internationally, definitely not. He's played well at some events, like when he played in that pug at ClutchCon with, who was it? It was like Summit, Mo, Frost, Desi, Skadoodle, and they were just kind of a pug thrown together. They made it out of group play. They played Liquid in the first best of 3 in the quarterfinals and lost in like a 2-1 series. And he played really well individually at that event. He was just sick. He was making really good plays. And when you looked at him at the CEVO Season 6 LAN, when he was playing with Hiko, Skadoodle, Roka, and Rush, and that kind of eLevate pug, because they had 2 stand-ins for that event. They took second to CLG at that event. He looked individually pretty good at that event as well. So, it's not like he's a bad player. He's looked really good individually in a lot of LAN events. He's got good aim. He's, like I said, that aggressive player. He's even willing to take on other roles. Like, I know he lurked a little bit in the CEVO Season 6 lane because Hiko was calling and didn't want to call and lurk, though that's Hiko's normal position. So Desi even kind of filled in there. So he's a bit selfless in his ability to maybe take on roles he's not used to playing for the sake of the team winning the event or having a better chance to do well at an event. So there is that aspect of him as well. But from what I've heard from other people that I haven't personally witnessed, but from hearing other people that for teams that he's tried out for and didn't make, or teams that he was actually starting for, that there were, definitely some issues where this confidence that I spoke of turns into arrogance sometimes. And maybe because of that, he doesn't listen as well, or he may get more upset with other people for not doing well when he is doing well, things like that. I've also heard that he's just hard to get along with sometimes. Like I said, sometimes his attitude just gets in the way. I don't know if it's necessarily raging or if it's just like people feel he's arrogant or what it is, a hyper inflated sense of self or what have you. I'm not sure. Like I said, when I'm talking to him, I can definitely see the confidence aspect, and that could be mistaken for arrogance. I can definitely see where people might get that impression. But I will say that he is still a very, very skilled player. If he can work on his mentality, if he can work on some of these attitude issues, even if he doesn't feel that he has attitude issues, if everyone else is telling you that you do, or you notice that you keep having trouble meshing with teams and you keep getting either released or you're being forced to quit or you're not getting along with your teammates, if this happens so many times throughout the course of, I guess, the year or so that he's been playing at a North American professional level, if you are noticing this, even if you don't feel that you are that way, you kind of have to start accepting the fact that maybe you are when this keeps happening to you so often. Because this is not the first time that Desi's been left out of a team or released from a team, even though you might think he was playing well, he still got left behind or still got snubbed, or at least he would think he got snubbed for someone else to come in or whatever. So yeah, I would say this just in conclusion. I've spoke at length about Desi in other videos. I'll link that if you want to hear more. But I think there's just a conflict here between his skill level, which is quite good, and his ability to implement it properly, for one, and then his ability to mesh with teammates, number two. And it seems like those two issues are kind of overruling his skill set right now. And so there needs to be some type of change there for him in the future. And yeah, that's all I can really say. I thought he played well on this team, eLevate. They did have some accomplishments, qualifying for Faceit LAN, being one of the top NA teams in that particular league for Faceit Stage 1. Like I said, second place at CEVO LAN, with the other North American teams. So there was some accomplishments there. But I guess like I said, this is a storyline we've seen time and time again with Desi, unfortunately. So hopefully he can figure it out, and good luck to him in the future trying to find another team, because I think he is still a good player. He just needs to work on some things, mostly I guess personality and attitude wise, as well as his play style in game. But his skills are there. I think I drug on about that a lot longer than I expected to. We'll move on to Professor Chaos coming into the team just really quick. First off, Professor Chaos came out of nowhere. If I'm 100% honest with you, I had never heard of him up until some of his recent online play, I guess, like in January and February of this year, leading up to when he was going to kind of debut at LAN for Nylum at the CEVO Season 6 Slam, which took place like later in March, and then the weekend after that, he was at ESEA for Nylum as well. And this team was full of a bunch of youngsters. I mean, you had Sanksington that had very little CS experience as well, at least in CSGO. I had never seen him at any NA lands or anything like that, maybe some local stuff, but nothing big. Then you had Professor Chaos, exact same boat. Then you had Unimatic, who had a couple little stints here and there on some lands. I think he played at ClutchCon with like Denial before they became Nylon, back when they still had Slimmy and Relics, and like well before Sanks and Professor Chaos came into the picture, back when Flowsick was still playing with this group of guys with Valence and such. And that was kind of the first time I had saw him play a CSGO LAN in a long time. I think he had played at another CSGO LAN a while back for another Denial lineup, not the same group of players, but it was just happens to be the same sponsor. But that was a pretty far behind the ClutchCon experience, which was like January of this year. I'm trying to remember exactly when that was. I want to say it was like just an early ESEA LAN or something like that. That's all I'm at. And he had been known from the CSGO community, or excuse me, Counter-Strike Source community, as like a young player that was like a new talent, whatever. So the point is when Nolan comes into the CEVO Season 6 LAN, didn't really know what to expect just because they had been playing pretty good online. But like I said, most of these guys had little to no like LAN experience in CSGO, but they performed well, right? They beat Luminosity in the opening series, looked good on their T side. Sanks and Unimatic were entering really well. Professor Chaos was kind of an aggressive fragger at times. Sometimes he was lurking. Sometimes he was their main opper. In fact, I think he was kind of their main opper on T side when they did have an op, and he also opted a lot on CT side. But they kind of floated the op around in this period. You would see Sanksington with the op sometimes on CT side as well as Unimatic. And Unimatic would even take up the op on T side every now and then. But Professor Chaos would have the op more often than the other two, so I guess he was kind of the primary opper. And anyway, he performed well at this event. I don't think he performed as well as Unimatic and Sanks did. I think those two kind of shined a bit more, and that carried over to ESEA LAN. I felt once again Unimatic and Sanksington were definitely kind of the brighter stars on that team at that event when they upset Cloud9 and such. But Professor Chaos still did play really well. And when all this roster shuffling took place, and I saw that they had dropped Flowstick to bring in Symphis, I figured, okay, so Symphis will come in as a support rifler. Unimatic and Sanks will be entry fraggers. Valence will be the in-game leader, as well as like another support rifler, and you have Professor Chaos, your opper. And I thought this would be a good lineup. I really did feel that this was a great team. Maybe even more successful than the island we have now, where Symphis is like kind of a dedicated opper, even though you're not used to seeing him play that role. He played a little bit for Cloud9, wasn't that successful at it. Though some of the online games he's looked okay now. But point is I felt this was like a good team role-wise as far as the pieces they had put together. But of course, Hiko becomes available because his whole super team deal with Skadoodle and all the other guys fell through, and so now he's just ready to kind of maybe drop down and come to his last resort options for finding a team. Obviously, he's good friends with Symphis. Nylum is probably one of the teams out of the NA roster shuffle that came up pretty good. CLG may have been an option for him, but he apparently felt the roles wouldn't work there. I don't get how we thought the roles worked any better at Nylum when he's coming onto that team as a passive rifler next to Valens. And then you have like a support player and Symphis, who's kind of a hybrid aggro passive rifler, and then you have your two entry fraggers. But then you don't have an opera anymore. So I feel like the reasoning that Hiko kind of gave for not wanting to join CLG is because they wouldn't have a set opper. They would have to give it to like Cutler or Tarek situationally. It's the same exact problem when you join Nylum. Honestly, it's the same role issue in my opinion. And I think it's something that still kind of affects Nam to this day, which is why I always thought, and I know this is going to be unpopular, and this is nothing against Valens, because I think he is a good player and he is pretty good at this, like being the in-game leader, though I think Simphis has a lot of say in the leadership of this team. But I think role-wise, not talent-wise or skill-wise or performance-wise or anything like that, but role-wise, it would have made more sense for he could have come in for Valens, because that would have been that same kind of lurker, passive rifler type style that both kind of displayed. I know Flosick was kind of the lurker on the team before he left, but Valens was still a pretty passive rifler, and I think Higo could have fit into that role well. Or Higo could have been like Flosick's direct replacement, and Simmons could have been like Valens' replacement role-wise as a support rifler or whatever, while you still had Professor Chaos opping, and you still had your two entry riflers in Automatic and Sanctington. So I think role-wise, that would have made more sense, but they didn't go that route. You know, they kept Valens because he was the in-game leader and captain of the team. They get rid of Professor Chaos to bring in Hiko, and yeah, on paper, Hiko's a better player. He's one of NA's best, if not the best in NA, or at least the top 5 for sure. At a time, he was NA's best, like throughout most of 2014. Even got ranked in like HLTV's power rankings for players. I mean, obviously a good player, right? But Professor Chaos gets removed, and that was a bit unfortunate. And since then, we haven't seen Professor Chaos do anything. That's why I guess I spent a lot more time on his history than on the current situation, just because there is no current situation yet. He hasn't played much for eLevate, but this is how he got to where he is, basically. And I felt it was unfair for him to get removed from him. Like I said, I think role-wise, it would have made sense to make a different swap to bring Hiko in. But whatever. That's a decision Nyland tried to make. And Professor Chaos definitely showed some promise when he was playing with Nylam in those 2 LAN events I spoke of earlier. Maybe he didn't shine as bright as, like I said, Automatic and Zanks did in those events, but he still showed that he can play quite well, especially for a guy who had very little experience playing CSGO at a high level. For him to just go into 2 LANs in March with no prior CSGO LAN experience and play as well as he did, that certainly does show some promise. Now, when he comes into eLevate, role-wise, I'm not sure what this means. Does this mean that Professor Chaos will pick up the op and XP3 will just kind of be an in-game leader rifler and he won't pick up the op? He won't be the main operator anymore? Or will XP3 be the main operator? Professor Chaos comes in as kind of just an aggressive rifler, just kind of a direct replacement for Desi. I know that Chaos has the skill set to kind of do a bit of both there, so maybe he'll just be a secondary operator, but he'll be like an entry fragger rifler. I'm not sure how the roles will work with this team, but I can say that as a player, Professor Chaos did show some promise with Nylam. I mean, he's going to have some veteran leadership with XP3. He's got Storm, a veteran player that can maybe give him some support, and I think that those are some cool people who can kind of coach him and develop him as a player. And like I said, he could be a good player for this team depending on how they use him for sure. So that's kind of just my thoughts about the Desi out, Professor Chaos in situation for eLevate. I'm going to be doing some more videos here soon. I plan on doing a video about, you know, JDM permanently joining CLG and the whole CLG team house thing. That's probably a video I'll release soon. I just wanted to watch some more CLG demos first and make sure that I kind of had all my ideas down on how they played and stuff before I make comments on it. So I'm going to go do some demo research there first. And so that'll come out. Then I'll continue the Behind the Play series as well with another video coming up soon on that also. And so with that said, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, follow and subscribe. See you next time.